thank you everyone for, hold on, I gotta fix this. The cameras just went all over. For coming to the presentation today. I'm really excited to share the Life Skills Training Center with you all. As noted, my name is Kim and I am with Mahlum Architects. I focus primarily on higher education and healthcare in my day-to-day work, but a lot of my passion has always been around disability. Oh, I moved the cameras on screen. Sorry, let me move that. Has always been around disability forward design and how we can support those um, who need it most. Are my cameras? There we go. Sorry, it was showing up on my presentation screen. I don't know if you all could see that or not.
It's looking good to us.
Great. But I wanted to make sure that you had my contact information in case any follow-up questions come up through the course of the presentation as well. So we are going to talk about the Life Skills Training Center today. First, however, I wanted to touch a little bit on the history, both in terms of accessibility code, what's that meant for for schools like School for the Blind, and then where we are today, looking at the project and some lessons learned, and then we'll save some time for Q&A at the end. So starting with that history component, I want to touch a little bit on disability rights and spatial experience. This movement is not just about access and accommodation, but it's also about equality, belonging, and the recognition of disability as a fundamental part of human diversity. Um, those who experience disability have been in a bit of a journey from exclusion to what we hope now to be inclusion as we move forward. There's a lot of trajectory in that direction. Historically, people with disabilities have been marginalized, segregated, and excluded from our mainstream spaces. It wasn't just a physical separation, but also one that was deeply social. And it reflected attitudes towards the time, or at the time of viewing disability as a problem to be fixed rather than an identity to be embraced. And as things like the laws and AIA or ADA have happened, we've been in a place for a long time where we've started to accommodate. How do we take what actually works for somebody who is able-bodied and make it somewhat usable for somebody who experiences disability? And where we want to go along the spectrum and where we're starting to see that momentum is towards environments that support belonging and empowerment. That's an environment that lets people be who they are without needing to ask for accommodation. And that's what we tried to do with the School for the Blind. A lot of times people will ask me, well, what about the building code? Isn't that protect buildings from those who experience disability? And the truth is that the building code is the minimum legally required threshold for inclusion in your project. It focuses heavily on those who use a wheelchair, which is a super important experience to design for, but it focuses very minorly on support for other disabilities. It doesn't have requirements that speak to the many different types of disabilities experienced by people each day. So over 60 years ago, we saw the ANSI standard 117.1 passed. We're still using updated versions of that today. And it was followed by a number of codes that you can see here. But there's really still no building code that takes a holistic view on supporting people with varying needs. And to put things in perspective, in the time since accessibility in buildings was first talked about, we've done some pretty incredible things as humans. We have managed to put a person on the moon. We have developed commercially available technologies like personal computers, cell phones, and we have managed to identify all of the 20 to 25 genes in human DNA. We are capable of doing very hard things. But the challenge is we still have not managed to make buildings that are truly accessible. I'm sorry, I've got to move. I'm having something funky happen with my cameras. It's covering up my my view here. All right. 26% of people in the United States experience a disability, and it's estimated that less than 6% of our national housing supply is designed to be accessible. So I sound like I'm up on my soapbox right now, but I'm sharing this with you so that you can understand the importance of projects like these and the decisions that we make as architects and in conversations with our owners. There is no building code or law in place that's going to make full accessibility happen. It can only happen if you have the will to do it and an owner that's willing to go there with you. We were lucky for that in that respect on this project. Looking now at what the School for the Blind was initially, there's some language in here that is going to be a little bit of offensive. It is true, however, to the time when these things were established. So I wanted to stay consistent with how things viewed because I think it starts to show our progress. Um, Before it was the Washington State School for the Blind, the current campus was developed in 1886 as what they called the Washington State School for Defective Youth. So historically, anybody who was different from mainstream, whether they were deaf, hard of hearing, blind, or low vision, or cognitively disabled, they were all sent to go to the school that was called for defective youth, educated separately in institutions that provided specialized services, but also perpetuated societal exclusion. And that's going to be an important point later on. And I think if we think about something like the name, the School of Defective Youth, we can all understand the impact that might have on one's self-esteem and how they might view the opportunity or trajectory of their life. Just for kicks, some old pictures of what the school originally was. This is actually the second graduating class of the School for Defective Youth. And as the school got underway, the director, his name was Director Watson. He wrote to the legislature about the condition of the school. He cited that there were fire hazards in the heating, dilapidated furniture. He also expressed concern that including those who experience cognitive disabilities was becoming a hindrance to the learning of deaf and blind students without any benefits to those who experienced cognitive disabilities. My light's turning off on me. Um, so sometime between 1891 and 1905, the schools were further separated out so that more specialized education could occur, and the School for the Blind became a school that did just that, focused there. So here what we know is that the separation has occurred, but accommodation has not yet. And if we look towards one of their main buildings, this was the first structure that was to be built after those other buildings came down. This was the first structure on the current Washington State School for the Blind campus. It is still there. The building once housed a gymnasium, library, living quarters, classrooms, and offices, and it's where the LIFT program was before we started the new project. There were really great things happening within the curriculum. Students were taught home industrial skills like hammock making, piano tuning, cooking, and housework. There was always the intent to teach skill that supports independent living, but it wasn't done in a built environment that was designed intentionally for those who experience blindness or low vision. And when we look at the building and the architecture, you can step back and say, hey, this looks nice. But what the architecture is actually messaging was more about the benevolence of those funding it rather than supporting. It might look very different if it was purpose built for those who are blind or have low vision. So where are we today? This is the campus located in Vancouver, Washington, just north of 205. You can see that old main, let me get my little cursor up there. This was that original building. And it houses several different things. There's the Ogden Resource Center, which focuses a lot on Braille, some support facilities, a gym facility. This is the grade 6 through 12 school and other living quarters. And our project for the LIFT program is here on where you see that big pink star. Get my mouse back. Sorry, I'm having some screen issues. All right, so this is the new building. It's about 12,000 square feet, and it is home for both the LIFT program, which is the Learning Independence for Today and Tomorrow project, as well as the Washington's Department of Services for the Blind. Their new offices are located on the second floor. Both of these were originally located in that original building. It is so created through the collaboration between WSSB and DSB. The LIFT program, which is what we're going to spend the majority of our time talking about today, is offered to high school graduates aged 18 to 21 who are interested in experiencing independence through real life practice before transitioning to less protective settings. Participants live on campus from September through June, including weekends, and learn to manage all aspects of adult life. So we cover personal care, kitchen skills, household management, financial management, and so on and so forth. A key aspect of the program is for participants to learn life skills by supervised staff and then spend significant time unsupervised to allow them to take more and more responsibility for their day-to-day activities. Because of this, we've designed the Life Skills Training Center to mimic a home. It includes everything a person might find there. So, a foyer to hang coats and store shoes, individual private bedrooms and bathrooms, shared areas such as a den and a dining room, a large open air balcony, and an outside courtyard. We worked to have everyday objects and building components like lighting and appliances presented in multisensory format. We have varying options for control and operability so that we can give a range of choice and enable people to confidently advocate for their needs upon completion of the program. One of the things that I wanted to touch on is our engagement process. So, one of the things that we discussed with the client right out of the gate was really being able to work with those who have lived experience as we went through the process. And then one of the things that made it very challenging was that we were awarded this project in April of 2020. So a month before that, we learned that the pandemic was happening. We didn't know what that meant, but we soon found out that that meant that we were going to have to design this entire project virtually. And when you think about how much we rely on the visual during a virtual presentation, we really had to rethink how we were going to make sure that we could get the feedback and provide appropriate techniques. So what you see up on the screen now is some journey mapping that we did. We also worked on this project with Mass Design out of Boston, and specifically Jeff Mansfield, who is a practicing architect who has been deaf since birth, as well as Chris Downey, who is an architect who experienced a midlife sight loss. And so we had their experiences to help guide the processes that we came up with. Um, but in the journey mapping, our goal was to understand what worked and didn't work and what their day to day looked like in their existing building. So we printed tactile maps of the existing building and used kind of strings and pin collections to have people walk us through their day. We learned a lot in this process. We understood that the acoustics of the existing space were very challenging. So those who are blind or low vision rely very heavily on their hearing. And the existing building was designed as such that it didn't allow for help and orientation. There are some conditions, such as with the stairs, where people shared with us that every day they were afraid they were going to fall down the stairs because there was no acoustic feedback they could get that helped them understand where the stairs were at in the building. The other thing that we learned in this was that people were spending a lot of time in their individual rooms. Everything was in its own little space, including all of the social spaces. And so people didn't really come out. It was a fairly isolating experience, which those who experience disabilities I shared early on are often left to experience. As we proceeded through design, we used a lot of tactile maps. So every design meeting, we printed a new tactile map. And when I say tactile, what I mean by that is each of these lines that you see that make up the plan were embossed. So they were raised so individuals could feel their way around the plan. And then you can see the Braille labels. So we set this up once and then we worked with the committee members each time to make sure we were all oriented in the same spot. We didn't change up, how we were handling it. We kept it consistent the whole way through so that it would be easy to navigate around the plan. And this was a tool that worked really well. Everybody on the committee was able to understand where they were at in the building and what it meant and give us really thoughtful feedback on how we could improve. Materials became another very important part of our discussion. We ended up shipping out little kind of gift boxes of samples to all the committee members so that we can talk through what might be appropriate. Some of what we learned in here was that the olfactory or sense of smell was very important. Certain samples they held up to the camera and they said, please do not use this. It stinks. And it's things that, in my sense of smell, didn't smell out of the ordinary to me. So as you gain or lose senses, different ones come on and take a stronger hand. And we found that the sense of smell was really critical to how space would be experienced. The other thing we learned was that when it came to things like carpet, this is supposed to be a home, it's supposed to be comfortable. And when you can't see commercial carpet, it actually feels quite hard. So we get a lot of the softness if you are a sighted individual from being able to see the material of the carpet. If you can't see it, it feels not comforting, not warm. And so as we get into some of the pictures, you'll see where we used a much plusher carpet. We also made a failed attempt to come up with our own Braille labels, which are these little dots that you see in the corners of each of the samples. Um, that was a pretty big fail on our part, where Braille's very specific. You need to have this proper spacing, and so from that we learned that we needed to get a Braille label printer, and all future samples included Braille labeling. The other thing that we needed to do is we needed to understand how could we communicate with our consultants. And so this is something that Chris Downey came up with. He uses wax sticks, and each of these sticks have a different thickness based on color. So he was able to draw for us through using wax sticks and then explain his concepts by telling us the color, because since we were all on screen, we couldn't really identify the thickness of some of them. So this is an example of a mobility analysis that he did for us up on the second floor. Our original layout is from the stair over to the reception desk, and how a sighted person might navigate through that space is along the yellow line. So that was the intended route, was going from the top of the stair over to the reception desk. And what he shared with us in purple was the reality of the actual or the predicted route that somebody who is blind or low vision would take. And because generally there's a reliance on surfaces that you or your white cane can touch to get to where you're going. So here, you might be reliant on a receptionist to call out, hey, come over here to your left. And even then, it's hard to navigate. So he started taking that layout and looked at ways where we could either use flooring to help section off different spaces. But what we found was that we had just some kind of fundamental choices that needed to be changed. And in his final version of the analysis, he offered an alternate reception desk that you can see there in blue, a different way of zoning the furniture. And this makes a much more direct and equitable route to reception from where our original design was. So that kind of feedback was really valuable throughout the process and informed a lot of the work that we did. In the landing on the plan, this is a graphic that we used as we thought about what the layout of the building should be. And we were really wanting to push back against this historical context of isolation. And we thought, well, how do you do that when you've got 8 bedrooms? The most efficient thing is a double loaded corridor. But it wasn't the right thing. And so what we looked at was what are the different scales of social interaction that people have, and how can we use that to inform the plan? So the bedrooms are the green rectangles that you see, and everybody, of course, has their own bedroom. We then paired them to try and create these little individual neighborhoods together, which we have located at both the north and the south of the plan. Each of those have some social space associated together. So if that kind of group of two wants to become four, they have the kind of their own zone to work within. And then the bulk of the bedrooms all center around the major social spaces of the project. So the den, the dining, the kitchen, and the courtyard. The feedback that we've received to date is that the groups are, each of the cohorts are kind of tighter than ever. When we were there doing some visits and post occupancy, we found that people were out in the spaces for a majority of the time. So it was really great to see that come to fruition. I'm going to tour you around now. So in general, we've got the layout, the floor plan on the left-hand side with kind of a pink identifier of where the images were taken, and talk about some of the strategies that we took. One of the things that can be difficult is the identification of entries. And we also realized partway through that we were really planning for two different experiences. One is the blind or no sight experience, and the other is the low vision. So people who have some degree of sight, which is actually a majority of blind people have some degree of sight. And so we had to really think about how can you manage the experience of both. So in this case, looking at the entryway, we wanted to make sure that we could clearly define that, and we chose to do some contrasting color concrete at each of the entryways. So both Lyft and DSB have their own contrasting entryway. Um, and that's to aid those who have low vision. The bollard that you see there as well in the bottom right-hand corner, and all lighting on the project was low glare or anti-glare fixtures. Glare is a huge issue if you have low vision. And so we wanted to make sure that we weren't exacerbating the experience that people were having. In terms of trying to serve those who were blind, you might be able to see that in the image, we've got control joints closer together in that dark portion of the concrete. And that was to give a different textural pattern so that it could be perceptible by somebody using a white cane as a different. I think that worked to some degree. What we also found was that there was a little bit of a tilt to the concrete, and that's actually what most people used as the identifier. But we wanted to be consistent at all of the entries with this kind of treatment. We also wanted to make sure that we thought about things like pickup. A lot of people are using lifts or Ubers to navigate through the rest of the city, and so things like benches were important amenities to include. Those benches also become cues for those who are using a cane to be the consistent thing that they always know where it's at. As we make our way into the building at the front door, having a place to put your shoes, welcome you into your home was a concept that everybody was really on board on. So this is right as you move through the vestibule, a place to, put down your cane, take off your shoes, and really enter the building with the idea of home. As we move forward now to the dining room, there's a lot happening here. So, as I had mentioned earlier, acoustics are a very important consideration. Should be in all projects, but particularly those for those who are blind and low vision. So, up at the ceiling, we've used an acoustic DLT, and between each of those slats, there's insulation that helps mitigate the sound bounciness or noisiness. Um, our light fixtures also have fabric shades to them, and I think, probably most of us know that that doesn't really add a lot of acoustical value. But what it does do, allows you to have pendant fixtures without creating places where people are going to bump their heads into. So Chris Downey has about 1,000 pictures of himself running into things with his head because we're not always great about clearances. And so that's something to keep in mind. How can we create a clearance? And in some cases, how can we then just help support the experience? We're going to talk about light fixtures a little bit later. All light fixtures in the project are both dimmable and color tunable, and that's to support the low vision experience. So I've got some slides where we'll talk to that. In the back of the dining area, you can see the artwork wall. So this project was part of the 1% for Art. And much of the artwork was designed by those who are blind or low vision, and all of it was a tactile experience without exception. Moving into the kitchen, this is where we saw some of the curriculum come into play. So one of the things that we wanted to make sure we were doing was understanding what the experience might be as people move into their new home. Um, we provided both gas and electric stoves so that residents could learn on both. And we also wanted to make sure that we had several options so that people could be taught with their instructor at a distance and not hovering. So that's part of why you see the opening here at the back of the kitchen. And then there's also an island that's used for, um, just for gathering and eating, but it's also a place where the instructor can sit and and teach from a distance to help increase that confidence and skills. One of the things that we learned about too was the idea of a cane notch. So when you're in a house, most people don't wander around their houses with their cane because they know their house well. They've set up their cues. Um, but we did this as kind of a nod to experiences that people have to deal with. And what we heard a lot was the idea of when people are going up to a new desk or a reception area, is you lean your cane up above, up against the desk, and then it falls over, and then they're embarrassed, and then they have to pick it up, and then they might bonk their head. So we wanted to find a way to respect the use of a cane and think about how could we create a rest for it. So this is something that is probably more critical if you're designing a facility that people come to rarely. Like I said, like a reception or a hospital front desk or a school front desk. But things like these are small moves that can go a long way into supporting the experience that people have. This is an image of the den. So this is an example of where you can see the plush carpet that we used. We actually recessed the concrete down both here and in the bedrooms so that we could use a really plush carpet. The residents shared with us that they absolutely love this. So they're wearing shoes in the photos, but they'll often wander around without their shoes on, and it just increases a sense of comfort and home. We also made sure that we used contrasting colors when it came to the adjacent concrete or the carpet, so that there was clear identification of where people were at within the building. Here in the bedrooms, we also have, we use the similar carpet technique. But one of the key things here was how can people independently operate within their bedrooms? And for our low vision residents, lighting was a big part of that. Um, I had mentioned earlier that color temperature or the ability for fixtures to be color tunable is an important feature. And the reason for that is depending on what low vision condition you have, sometimes you can see better or it's more comfortable to be in cool light versus warm light and vice versa. So we found some fixtures. It's actually part of the Philips Hue system that could be controlled by the residents. So that dial that you see on the lower left-hand side is, it's got four scenes set for neutral, cool, warm, and then you can set a fourth scene as well. You dial it for the dimmability of it. And it's connected to a magnet that sits on the wall, so you can take it with you as you move about the room. So that was an important feature. But what was really important about it was that we wanted to make sure that we found a residential product that you could go somewhere and easily get so that when the residents move into their new homes, they have the ability to install features like this there. So it's a lot about how can we put things into our building that will educate the residents on advocating for themselves or knowing what products are available for their experience. Thermostats were another story. We were not able to find any truly accessible thermostat on the market. And this one, yeah, there's tactile, buttons that help you control the temperature, but you still don't know what the temperature is set at. And so you have to basically hit the buttons a bunch of times and then sit there and see if you're warm enough or cool enough. And that's just not an experience that we want with anyone. So we are looking at talking to manufacturers about how we can make something that's more accessible. A lot of people will ask about like, oh, well, what about, touch screens and voice activated stuff? And voice activation is not quite there yet. And touch screens do somebody who can't see a screen absolutely no good. So as we're moving towards some of these technological solutions for other things, it's actually increasing the inaccessibility of some of the built environment. So that's something to think about. Yeah. So the courtyard was a very important space for the program. One, it's just increasing a social space. Again, the social intelligence was a huge part of this curriculum. Here again, we use differing concrete textures to identify spaces. So we've got the darkened concrete. It doesn't show up as well in this photo because we had some rain the day we photographed, so it kind of muddied things up. But at each of the entries, we have the same darkened concrete close joint patterns that we have everywhere else. Regular walkways are just standard concrete, and the seating areas have like an exposed aggregate. And the exposed aggregate turned out to be probably the best texture, the most identifiable for old folks. I do get questions about like, well, what about wheelchair users? And the texture difference is not so great that it makes like a super bumpy or uncomfortable experience for those in wheelchairs. You have to kind of try out different things, but we found one that we thought was really the right balance. Some of the features in the courtyard, we wanted to make sure that we had a barbecue or a grill because I think many of us know, especially now that it's summer, that can be a large part of the social experience. Um, the two individuals kind of in the center of the picture are sitting on an herb garden. That was an intentional thought towards sensory design and thinking about, again, the sense of smell and how we can provide something where you can experience your food through smell and take it and move it into the kitchen. Um, and landscape in general was something that we thought a lot about, and we worked with our landscape architect to find the right balance of fragrant bushes that wouldn't be overwhelming because you can go too far. So we really wanted to think about what's the right level for everything. One other little fun thing in the garden was we wanted the chance to experience weather through sound. And so we created this gutter detail with the help of Chris Downey again and a splash pad. We made sure that we had located operable windows through it so that are right next to it so that you can be in the building and still hearing the rain in kind of a real intentional way. So we tried to think throughout the course of the project about all of the different ways that we could provide a different sensory experience than one so heavily relying on sight. I have a couple lessons learned for you. So this is a close-up of one of the pieces of art, and we did not do the signage associated with this, but this was a rough one to find out about because had we known it would be the case, we could have given some thought on it. But um, the the installers made the signage, it lists who the artist is, what the piece is, the year it's made, and all that stuff. And it's got full braille on it. But it was located up on the vertical left-hand side of all of the art cubbies. And if you think about, you probably want to be feeling the art while you're reading the description of it. And you're now put in a real awkward position where you're trying to feel the art with one hand and then kind of twisting your arm to read the braille as you go. It's a really non-ergonomical way to have installed the signage. The simpler and more comfortable solution would have been to install the signage flat down on the horizontal surface, and that would have been a better way to do that. We had a lot of lessons learned on signage on this project, including difficulties with some of the Braille translators that signage companies typically use. They don't always translate Braille in the way that Braille readers actually use it. The Ogden Resource Center here on campus does offer a Braille review. So we have been sending a lot of our signage submittals to them to review it and make sure we've got the Braille accurate. Another thing, I don't know if this is a lesson learned as much as it is a what if question for us. When we started this project, there was a lot of discussion with the owner about how far do we go with designing for advocacy. Um, I had worked on this campus, gosh, 20 years ago. And at the time, there was a lot of concern about designing something that was special for those who are blind and low vision and educating them there and then sending them out into a world that wasn't then designed for them. And I think as more conversations have come up about equity and inclusion, it's been realized that the change has to start at some point. Things don't get better if you don't change it. And so that became a goal of the project. Um, but one of the large discussion points we had was about if we locate the entrance to the building along the street or if we located it where we did. So let me see. This is the facade of the building that's facing the street, and then this is the entry to the lift program. Um, and part of that was just thinking about from when you think about the societal exclusion piece that I talked about at the beginning of the program, how do we then take this prominent site and say, we're here too, we're part of your community? Um, and so our initial thoughts were to put the entry along the street. However, there was a lot of concern because as of right now, the park across the street has some less than desirable activity. There's often people who are living in their cars along the street. And so there was some concern about the safety of the residents. And that's why we ended up locating the entry to the side. Um, we did, however, include a balcony out here on this end so that there still could be some of that interface with the community. But when we think about like, well, what about 20 years down the line when maybe activity in the park has gotten more positive, the street experience has gotten more positive. So this is kind of one of the things we wonder about what could have been. Another lesson learned was in terms of the light controls. So I told you about the fixtures that were in the bedrooms. Those were real simple and easy to use. Everybody loved them. But when it came to the light fixtures out in the central space, we used more commercial grade fixtures. And what that came with was a really complicated control system. So you can see the controls, and you can see the painter taped on braille sign that attempts to explain how to use those controls. Um, Still nobody can really quite figure it out in a really easy way. So we're working towards trying to simplify that. But had we just gone with, the more residential system everywhere, I think it would have probably been a better choice. And then lastly, one of the lessons we learned was about the slat wall that created. Um, so you can see it there. It's between the foyer and the dining room. And it was an intentional thing because we wanted people to come into the door, have their place to, rest their belongings. But we also wanted people to be aware that there were things going on in the kitchen and in the dining room and that there were people there. So we wanted to make sure that sounds could be heard, smells could come through. But what we found out was that where there are the slats, and it's particularly a challenge from the dining room side, is that there's not enough wall there for sound to bounce off of it. And so residents can't use their echolocation skills to understand that there's a wall there. So that's something to think about is how imperceptible something can be like that when we do things like slat walls. I think there's plenty of things we could have done had we known that was going to be an issue. We could have tightened up the slats. We could have angled some of them so that there was more surface area to bounce off of. The superintendent of the school was very gracious because he said, well, this is a learning facility and this will teach people that not all walls are, perceptible through echolocation. But that's one of the things that I wish we had learned about in advance. So that is a little bit about the project. I am happy to take any questions you might have. And I'm going to stop sharing so that I can see you all.
There is a question in the chat right now. 8 bedrooms is less than I would have expected. Is 8 the approximate typical number of blind persons participating in the program each year?
Let's see. So the first question here is 8 bedrooms is less than I would have expected. Is 8 the approximate typical number of blind persons participating in the program each year? Yeah, that was determined through a programming effort, kind of that the state and the school had done ahead of it. But yeah, 8 is about the number that they share. They have been fully booked. I don't know how long that number will be, but that is the number in the program. There's also a question about, can you share the manufacturer of the lighting controls for the different light scenes? Could these switches be utilized in typical homes depending on different seasons or lighting desires? So the ones that worked well in the home were the Philips Hue system. It's available at, you can get it at Home Depot, you can get it on the internet, you can really get it at any kind of lighting place in your typical home improvement stores. So they can be used in different homes and different lighting desires. So it's not something that is only for those who are blind or low vision. And actually, a lot of new construction homes have started to put it in. And sometimes they go like wild with the colors, like red lights and purple lights. So yes, it's a commercially available project. It's Philips Hue. I'll put that in here. Um, let's see. So the question here came up about have you ever considered voice command devices for controlling lights and temperature? So what we found in talking with the users about it is that the voice command isn't quite there yet on being able to understand what is needed. And so that technology is just not available in a way that is consistent and reliable enough to date. Maybe now, it's been about 5 years since we initially started discussions on the project. Um, so maybe there's been some advancement. There's a question about the main gray exterior color. Please discuss. Um, the gray color that we chose was really in part because of the types of products that we wanted to use that didn't really have an impact on the specific experience. So we were looking at what low maintenance materials we could find. And so it's a Shoshugiban product. So it's like not a burnt wood, but I forget what the word is, a fired wood maybe. And so that just expressed some of what the owner had wanted to see. And in talking with them, sometimes the questions I get are, gosh, it's a beautiful building. Did it need to be? And it's a question that always kind of makes me laugh. But um, when people are attending this program, they still have a lot of their sighted friends or family come to visit, and there's a lot of pride when their friends and relatives say, "Gosh, this is such a beautiful building." So that was something that we had specifically talked about. Just reading through the next question here in Finland. Um, as we Great, just making some comparisons here to some of Alto's work in Finland. So thank you for that. Oh, great question here from Zachary Moran. Are there any publications or guides that talk to these design considerations that you would recommend? There's a few different places that you could look. So the National Institute of Science of Building Science has a guidebook for designing for low vision conditions. Chris Downey, of course, is a ridiculously good resource for anything that we could think of. And then there's also a group out of the Bay Area called the Kelsey Foundation, and they have put together a document that doesn't just cover blind and low vision, but that is one part of it. And it's the housing design standards for accessibility. Um, and that's a good one that covers a lot of the type of stuff that we talked about. And it's geared towards housing, but it doesn't need to be. There's a lot of lessons learned in there that you can take away and apply to any project type. Any other questions?
You must have just covered it perfectly.
See, Kathy, I see you talking, but I don't hear you.
Hmm. My audio is on. I don't know if anyone else can hear me.
Thank you to all of those who are saying nice things in the chat. It was an absolute honor to work on this project. Looks like Kathy's maybe trying to Okay, great. Thank you, Kathy. Anything else that we should cover with the group here before we disband for the evening? Oh, here we go. Will you discuss a little more selecting interior paint and finish colors? Yeah, we can definitely do that. Let me pull up here. Most of the colors that we selected, I want to see if there's a good picture. Might not have one there. Well, maybe I don't need a photo. So as in terms of selecting the colors, that was an interesting process. What was most important was contrast. So in each of the alcoves at the bedroom neighborhoods, we have a light color, and then on the outside of that, it's a darker color. So that contrast is really important. And then actually within the alcoves creating the light color, we had a Braille wallpaper. So one of the wallpaper manufacturers makes a wallpaper that has just a bunch of encouraging Braille words on it that the owner found, and they liked that representation, so we included that in it. But really, the colors were about how could we create contrast, and we had selected a few different palettes that the owner then chose from. In terms of the wood finishes, that was an interesting discussion for us. And I had asked Chris about if somebody who is blind can still interpret the warmth of wood if they can't see it. And he said that yes, particularly those who are low vision can, but there's also something to the different way that it feels. And so he felt that it was still important to include a lot of different wood finishes just to increase the sense of warm and calm within the space. Another thing on finishes, which is not necessarily related to color, was thinking about what surfaces are cleanable. It's really hard to clean a mess if you don't know that it's there. And so we use solid surface throughout the project, both in the bedroom, bathrooms, and in the kitchen itself. So just wanting to make those spaces that were easily cleanable. We also did things like when there were outlets in the kitchen island, we used the pop-up types so that you could clean that space relatively easily or keep it clean by putting the outlets down. All right, any other questions? Were there any special concerns about hardware? The biggest fear with hardware was people getting locked out on the balcony. So we had to think about that. So it was more concerns about access control. And how could we do that in a way that was both simple, but also created the security that was needed. As far as like just standard doorknob or door levers and things like that, there wasn't anything that we really needed to think about. I mean, we thought about it, but there wasn't any special outcomes from it. One of the interesting things were, with these being bedrooms, we had to be separated with a 1 hour rating, and the client was really concerned about bedroom doors having to be closed all of the time. And so we did put all of the bedroom doors on hold opens so that they could be open unless the fire alarm triggered them to be closed. But that was pretty much the extent of concerns about hardware.
So you still can't hear me?
Still can't hear you, Kathy. I don't know what happened. Oh, wait, Michael, could you hear Kathy?
I could.
Oh, okay, hold on. Maybe it's just me that can't hear you.
That makes me feel a little better. Thanks, Michael.
Hmm. I could hear you before. I don't know why I can't now. Sure, no problem. Let's see. So first question here regarding heightened sense of smell. Were there special HVAC air filtering system considerations? Um, that's a great question. You know, at the time, I think HVA and air filtering was more concerned by the pandemic that had just started. And so we do have the higher MERV air filtering throughout the project. I think the biggest concern that we heard actually was just in terms of wildfires as well. And so the idea of smoke coming in and not being able to clear it out of the building and how overwhelming that might be. So we did do increased air filtering throughout the project. We ended up with a LEED gold building as well. LEED silver was required, but with all of the material considerations in order to get things to create a healthy environment that was experienced well, um, you know, it actually catapulted us into the gold category. And there's a question here about key locks, keypads, or fobs. It was primarily fobs through a card reader. So that was how we controlled access at all the locations, was everybody was assigned a card. Thank you, Kurt.
Well, I know Kim can't hear me, but thank you everyone for coming. And if there's no other questions.
Thanks, Kim.
Thank you, Kim.
Thank you.
Have a good evening, everyone.